のもと熱に浮かされ
Who do you think the real protagonist of One Piece is? Because when you really dive into it, the protagonist of the series might not be who you think. And it may seem like the simple answer is Luffy because, well, he's the hero. But being a protagonist isn't as simple as just being some kind of hero in the narrative, especially given Luffy's relationship with being a hero.
Hero? Hell no!
But why?
Obviously because we're pirates! Come on! Heroes are great! But I'm not one!
You kind of need to open up your perception of what a protagonist is and understand the unique roles that all the central characters play in this series. From the supporting protagonists to the anti-heroes, there's a web of important characters that shape this story. These archetypes and their respective characters are part of what blur the line between good and evil in One Piece. And when I was thinking about that, that's what really made me question, what really is a protagonist? Is it always the hero of the story or the character that we as fans root for? Or could it be someone unexpected in the narrative arc? Like someone who's in the shadows, who's pulling the strings and driving the plot forward? Well, it turns out that the concept of the protagonist is as multifaceted as the stories they appear in. Because from the epic poems of Homer to the tragic plays of Shakespeare, protagonism has many forms, each of those forms interacting with their respective stories in their own unique ways and revealing different facets of human nature to us. And hey, I'll be honest, when I started writing the script, I thought this is gonna be super simple, right? Like, it's Luffy, he's the one protagonist, done. But ultimately, creating this video challenged my perception of protagonism. And it made me question who really holds the narrative reins in One Piece. Because in the world of One Piece, the concept of protagonism ebbs and flows. The characters are as unique and as vast as the world itself, and each plays a role in shaping the narrative. And just like these characters, there are unique types of protagonists that lead the story. And One Piece is special because, like any great high fantasy, instead of having just one protagonist, there are dozens. So I wanted to specifically look at 5 archetypes of protagonism and the characters that fit those archetypes in this story. So today we're going to embark on a journey through the world of One Piece's protagonists, so that we can better understand who's driving this story forward and why we love it so much.
ここで何があった何も
One Piece introduces us to the concept of Deuteragonists very early. And looking at it simply, a Deuteragonist is a character second in importance to the protagonist of the story, like Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger in Harry Potter. This isn't just a supporting character, but someone who's almost as close to moving the plot towards resolution as the protagonist. And one of the incredibly captivating things that One Piece does is offer up a list of characters who fit into this role, each one stepping in and out of the limelight as new arcs begin and end. Like in Arlong Park, we see Nami's journey from a seemingly selfish thief into a courageous navigator fighting for her people's freedom. Nami isn't at the center of the climax and the resolution in this arc, but she is the one pushing it forward. And similarly, in Alabasta, Princess Vivi takes on the role of the Deuteragonist, pushing the Straw Hats forward into the throes of her kingdom's political turmoil. Each arc seems to have a new character step forward to parallel Luffy and his crew, being the driving force on their engagement with that segment of the plot. However, through all of this, one character has always been the deuterist of all the Deuteragonists. And that, of course, is Roronoa Zoro. Not only does he have all the hallmarks of a classic Deuteragonist, his early entry into the series, his unique relationship with Luffy, but what stood out to me recently in the story is that when we look at all the personal missions and goals of the characters in One Piece who support our hero, Zoro's is the only one that's remained relevant through the bloat of character introductions. Sanji doesn't talk about the All Blue anymore. Nami hasn't mentioned a map of the world in like 900 chapters, but Zoro's been hell-bent on his goal to become the world's strongest swordsman through the time skip and beyond. And while Zoro may be the quintessential Deuteragonist of One Piece, so many other characters have had their time in the Deuteragonist sun, filling the role of other protagonist archetypes all along the way. One of those roles, a role that seems to change as frequently as the arcs, is the tragic hero. And a tragic hero is a protagonist of a tragic story or drama like Romeo in Romeo and Juliet. And honestly, every arc in One Piece is like its own little tragic mini-series. And they each seem to give us a unique character who serves as the tragic and emotional driver behind the plot. Like each arc in One Piece seems to feature a character who undergoes some profound and tragic transformation. Characters like Nico Robin or Brooke have tearjerker backstories, and those stories seem to drive significant portions of the arcs they're introduced in and the entire plot of the series. And characters outside the Straw Hats do the same. Law's tragic backstory redirected the entire plot of One Piece for like 10 arcs, and the entire final saga of One Piece was set up with Oden's painstakingly long and incredibly tragic backstory. And there are so many more that I could mention, and while I'm not going to bore you with a list of them all, it's clear that this is another protagonist role that's been filled by tons of beloved character as the story has progressed. But a character's sob story, or being loved by fans, or being like a good guy doesn't make them any more or less of a protagonist than anybody else.
Yeah, so? Probably just showing off.
Are you stupid? It's not normal. From what I hear, he's never slept a day in his life.
Huh? Didn't know people could do that.
As we get deeper into this question of protagonism, we have to acknowledge One Piece's anti-heroes. The anti-hero is a main character in a story who doesn't have traditionally heroic qualities like courage, idealism, or a strong sense of morality. These are characters like Snape from Harry Potter or Loki from Thor. And there are a few characters in One Piece who act as the main character in their own relationship with the plot, but defy traditional notions of heroism. You have this really consistent thing in One Piece where characters who are introduced as being like bad or ill-intentioned are shown to be so much more complex. Like Crocodile, he's presented to be this terrible, manipulative guy, and that hasn't been shown to be like completely false or anything, but then he has a bunch of moments later where he's shown to have this deep character history, a potentially trans background, and shows a series of redeeming actions during Marineford. And similarly, Mihawk wasn't ever presented to be a bad guy per se, but his introduction as a warlord and him absolutely murking Zoro the first time he appears is just directly juxtaposed with a similarly deep, complex character history. And that doesn't even get into what we see, like his redeeming moments of training Zoro during the time skip. But instead of spending all the time in this section on those clowns, there's one character who anti-heroes more than anyone else in One Piece, and that, of course, is Buggy the Clown. Not only does Buggy appear early in the series as the first real bad guy, but he's shown again and again to be a coward with no moral backbone. However, we do end up learning his backstory and finding out that narratively, he's probably closer to being Luffy than anyone else is. With the current story arcs for these three anti-heroes, it's looking more and more likely that they'll have a direct and crucial role on how this story plays out. But it's time to stop talking about protagonist archetypes with a bunch of characters that could fit them. Let's talk about the main show.
The dreams of pirates will never end!
One of the strongest protagonist archetypes in One Piece is the villain protagonist. It's pretty straightforward. It's like Tony Soprano or Walter White. And in One Piece, the line between hero and villain can often be blurred. Like, Luffy claims to not be a hero, even though we all know that he is, and all of our favorite characters are pirates. But no character embodies the concept of the villain protagonist quite like Blackbeard. Now, Imu could end up playing a similar role. At the time of filming this, I simply don't know enough to say one way or another, but it does seem like there could be a parallel there. But Blackbeard, he's been sitting in this role since he sat down next to Luffy at a bar in Jaya. Because despite his cruel and malicious nature, Blackbeard has driven this story forward from even before their interaction on Jaya. We learn things like the story of how he gained his power is what set in motion Marineford, that all the weird things about his nature were perceived by Buggy and Shanks in their childhood. We see directly how he parallels Luffy, and not in a way where the world of One Piece says that Luffy's right and Blackbeard is wrong either. Their existences, their wills tap into some truth in the One Piece universe simultaneously. And it kind of presents a challenge to the viewer. It challenges our perceptions of good and evil. Like, do good and evil really exist in the One Piece world? I mean, sure, we can project our morality onto their world, but in their world, does it matter? Does their universe care if Blackbeard or if Luffy find the One Piece first? No, it doesn't. And so Blackbeard sits opposite of Luffy. And I sit here calling him the villain protagonist. But if, in some cruel twist of fate, he's the first one to the One Piece and at the end of the story he sits atop the throne, Blackbeard won't be the villain protagonist. He'll just be the protagonist. And that's because protagonism doesn't mean heroism. because the hero of One Piece is Luffy. Now, we all know that he doesn't see it that way, and in a lot of ways, I actually agree with him, but I have a whole other video that goes in depth about that, so I'll leave a link to it in the description and not waste any of our time here. But ultimately, in our world's context, Luffy is a hero. And more importantly than that, Luffy is One Piece's protagonist. No other classification, no villain before it, no Deuteragonist. Deuteragonist. Man, that word sucks. I'm saying he's a protagonist. Period. End of sentence. He's the protagonist. Luffy may not fit a traditional mold of a hero, but he's the story's protagonist to a T. His journey to become the Pirate King drives the narrative forward, and it's through his goal and his journey to accomplish it that we go on our own journey in the One Piece world. Like, there may be tons of characters that play these different roles of protagonists, but at the end of the day, it's Occam's razor. The most obvious answer is likely the answer. But him being the protagonist isn't the reason that we love One Piece, because unlike in other stories, Luffy may be the protagonist, but he isn't the unilateral main driving force of this plot. One Piece has always been an ensemble cast. Like, the main character of One Piece is actually the Straw Hats as a group, and the friends we meet in each arc become part of the group that drives the plot. In One Piece, the concept of protagonism is as vast and diverse as the Grand Line itself. If it was just a story about a goofy, stretchy pirate, it would have lost its charm, and it definitely wouldn't be this successful 1,000+ chapters in. And I know for sure that I wouldn't love it the way I do if it weren't for the tragedy and triumph of Law, or the character arc of Robin, or the complex villainry of Blackbeard. I wouldn't really know what I was watching. I wouldn't be watching One Piece. So yeah, it might be straightforward who the traditional protagonist of One Piece is. But One Piece isn't just any other story. It's a fantasy epic that's narratively closer to Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones than it is most other anime. Because One Piece doesn't have one protagonist, it has an ensemble of protagonists, each with their own motivations and role to play, each with their own crazy, insane fans, and each one, to me, more interesting and impactful than the last.
渋滞のもと熱に浮かされ漢字を取るのさ